My son Jeffrey passed away in 2016 from an accidental heroin overdose that was laced with fentanyl. And what we found out after my son's death was that he had been trafficked to death.
Exploitation is the act of using someone unfairly for your own advantage. I would witness and see people that were exchanging their body for money.
I started working the streets, and I've been arrested like 36 times for prostitution or solicitation. The only value I had was my body, I thought. Nobody ever showed me that I was valued in any other way. I grew up, I was born in Texas, in southern Texas. My parents were addicts, and my first memory is of being in a high chair outside and my mom having a gun to her head, ready to commit suicide, and I started choking on a chicken bone, and it's what saved her. She came to my rescue. That was my first memory, and she ended up going into a treatment center, but it turned out to be a religious cult where you couldn't leave. You couldn't. 6-hour church services every day. The person that ran it was very. He was sick. He would discipline. He was the only one that was allowed to discipline the kids, and so he used a lot of. It was a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of fear tactics, all in the name of God, and so I stopped believing in God at an early age. I remember my grandmother telling me to say that I was being molested by the man who ran this place my mom was at. And I didn't know what that meant, what she was telling me to say, but I said it anyway. And it was happening, but I didn't know that's what it was called. I thought it was just behavior modification is what he called it. So they did investigating. I wasn't allowed to see my mom or anybody without supervision for a short amount of time, but then they let me go back with my mom, and everything returned back to the way it was. So my parents divorced, and my dad was a fisherman. He was a shrimper on the Gulf of Mexico. And he drank very heavily and was a heroin addict. And we went around from motel to the boat. And there was times when he wouldn't bring me back, or that he would forget me places. I'd be 4, 5, 6, and in the bars all the time. And so I was used to people getting touchy-feely, or him forgetting me places, and just sitting and kind of waiting for him. But I loved him so much. Like I waited for him. I would sit with my little suitcase right on the curb and wait for him to come, and sometimes he wouldn't come, and sometimes when he did come, I was so excited. I realize now, like, you don't know that the life you're living is not normal until you get older and you see other people's lives. I was always very positive and just smiley, but I remember from a young age feeling very tired already, and not like energy-wise, because I was super hyper. They told me I was allergic to sugar because I was so hyper, so thinking that it would scare me from eating it. But I remember wanting to go to sleep and not wake up, and not realizing that was like not suicidal thoughts, but just being so tired, and that like before age 5 even. So I would go with my dad, and when I was 14, we were out on his shrimp boat, and I went up. I think I walked up the stairs, or either walked around to the other side of the deck, and he was down on the ground, and he had yellow stuff coming out of every pore in his body, and he had overdosed, and the radio on the boat was broken, of course, and so I had no way to get a hold of anything, reach out to the Coast Guard or for any help. So I laid down with him and fell asleep, and it was really late in the night. It took a long time, and Coast Guards finally found us, and after that, they shipped me up to Wisconsin, and that was the start of everything. I just was so unprepared for what the world was like, and all this time, the foster care system, my social worker, nobody asked any questions. And I find that so strange now that and I think it's probably gotten better, but when kids act up, there is a reason. It's mind-boggling to me. I believe the system the trajectory of my life would be greatly altered had they have asked the right questions or offered any kind of help. In the beginning, when I first moved up here, I first started acting out. I was very promiscuous. I remember getting into the bars, running away, getting into the bars at 14, 15. And what I would do is I would go to where I knew the police hung out. And I would go to the courthouse. And I got to know the owner and befriended him and flirted my way, so they wouldn't ID me when they saw me on Water Street or elsewhere. So I remember 14, 15 years old getting into the bars, and it was pretty much every day. From a young age, the only value I had was my body, I thought, and the only... nobody ever showed me any other type of attention or that I was valued in any other way. It blows my mind that when you see a kid, when you see a kid acting out or being promiscuous or at 14 years old, why? Why are they acting like that? Why are they doing that? And maybe then they're just, I still feel like it was studied, and when you've had trauma, I feel like it's pretty obvious that there was something happening. But I wish that somebody would have just listened to me, maybe just been kind, because I just felt so unwanted, because I moved around so much, and my mom, she used to tell me that I was a hard person to love, and she loved me, but she didn't like me, and I remember that stuck with me my whole life, kind of. That's been a narrative that's constantly played in my head. I love you, but I don't like you. And, I'm a hard person to love. Like, when you grow up believing that there's nothing really worth fighting for, there's nothing worth I never felt like life was really, I had a purpose. I never felt like I meant anything to anybody, or that's how everybody viewed me. Because I'll admit, I was a hard person to love. I really was. I had an attitude all the time. I was in trouble. I was a liar. I was a hard person to love.
But I think it's so important what the words mean things. The littlest words, especially to a kid. Like, but you know, as far as the system failed me, like big time. And if they would have just asked me, even nobody ever asked if I was abused. Nobody ever asked any of that stuff. It was just like, I don't know. I'm still confused about that whole thing. But if somebody would have put some time into me and I don't know, it kind of steered that, directed that, all that energy and that I had, that rebellion, I think that I could have been something great. Right? And I still can be something great. Thank you, Jesus. But if somebody would have just taken the time to spend time with me, I don't really know the questions that could have been asked, but any questions actually. When I met that girl and went to Chicago, that as sick as this sounds, the fact that somebody wanted me, whether it didn't matter what they wanted me for, there was a comfort to that. I was already used to, you know, the sexual stuff like that. There was no value on sex to me. Like I didn't value it at all. But this man, my pimp, I would do anything to make him happy. And it got to the point where if I didn't make $1,000 a day, I would literally get beat, get electrocuted. He put me in dog cages. It was awful. He had me so brainwashed, thinking nobody else would love me and my family would never want me and nobody would want me, that I did whatever I could to make him happy and to keep him happy. And I found out I was pregnant when I was 7 months pregnant. And I was so like underweight. I mean, you couldn't tell I was pregnant. And I worked all the way up. And while I was in labor, I remember being in a call and some guy on top of me while I was in labor, and he wouldn't let me go to the hospital until I was all done for the night, until I think it was like 3 something in the morning when I finally got done. And he dropped me off in front of the Cook County Hospital and left me there. I was never able to bond with that baby because 2 days later I was made to go back to work. And I didn't know how to care for a child. And today he is sitting actually in Cook County on double homicide charges, because I ended up, when I did finally get away from my pimp, I had to leave my son, because I had tried to leave with him multiple times, but he always found me, or I always went back because I had no other place to go. But I went hard just to stay numb. So it gave me the courage to leave. So, you know, while it was harming me and making me sick, it also gave me the courage. And so when I got out of that relationship, I went right into another one with another pimp. And this one was even worse. But he had multiple girls, and he would give us plates of dope, of crack and heroin in the morning when we woke up. And depending on how much money we'd make, we'd get him throughout the day. And so that's how he kept us. And he kept us dressed really well. But he was what you call like a guerrilla pimp.
And I've always had a mouth on me. So I took a lot of beatings, but like none of the physical abuse was ever anything compared to the mental and emotional abuse that I think I endured, because that stuck with me and that scars you. I started working the streets, and I've been arrested like 36 times for prostitution or solicitation in total. Nobody ever offered help. There was nothing, nobody ever asked about if I was being, held somewhere, if I needed help or anything. There was nobody cared. So I did that for years. I was so bad, I would be in the alleyways, just wandering around, literally up for days and going back and forth, getting money and then going to smoke crack. It was awful. And there was no hope. I couldn't even daydream about a different life. I would be sober for a period of time, but I didn't know how to change my behaviors. I didn't know how to change my thought process, and I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have anything. I did not value anything about myself, and it got so bad where in 2020 I was on a suicide mission, basically, and I was on my way back from California, Arizona. Actually, I'd picked up a vehicle and I flew out there, and I was bringing back $250,000 worth of fentanyl and cocaine and methamphetamines, and I got pulled over while in Kansas, and I knew I was done. I was done. I was done. I was going away for a long time, and I still had more on me, so I decided to just take it all. So while in custody, I swallowed a big chunk of fentanyl and was airlifted to the next state over. But I was pronounced dead for 8 minutes, and it was the most peaceful feeling I've ever had in my whole life. It was like a contentment. I felt something so so warm, and like I was not in pain, and I audibly heard, "It's not your time." I audibly heard God say, "It's not your time," and I didn't believe in God. But I remember begging and pleading, please, I can't go back. I don't want to go back.
So my son Jeffrey passed away in 2016 from an accidental heroin overdose that was laced with fentanyl. And what we found out after my son's death was that he had been trafficked to death. And so really it was after his death that I learned what sex trafficking was. I learned what my son had been through. We were a normal, regular family. We had lived in Alabama and moved up to Wisconsin when he was in first grade. He was a rough and tumble little boy, loved to play outside and do boy things. And the only group of kids that really accepted him were the kids that were making some pretty rough choices back then. And so in the 6th grade, he started experimenting with marijuana, eventually added in alcohol and cigarettes. By the summer of his 8th grade year, he was doing a drug called Triple C, which is his over-the-counter cold cough congestion medication. And then by his 9th grade year, he was starting to do prescription drugs. And during his 9th grade year of high school, he got in trouble at school for having that triple C on campus. And that day he came home from school and he told me that he's got a drug problem, that he didn't know how to stop. So he went to a day treatment facility, but all these kids there were there because they're juvenile delinquents. They're kids that just didn't handle the regular, normal school day type thing. And so they would bring drugs in on a regular basis there. And so he started using drugs again. It just got worse. And every time he would run away, he would use harder drugs, more drugs, higher levels of drugs than he was using before. In January of 2016, I'd gotten a phone call from him saying that he needed me to come pick him up. And we'd been through so much at this point that I knew it wasn't smart for us to just pick up and go drive to Madison. And so we decided to call the police and ask the police if they would come help us pick him up. And so when the police got there, my son was sitting inside a restaurant, and unbeknownst to us at that time, but the traffickers were outside of the restaurant. And as the officer went in to talk to my son, and they asked my son where he's been, what has he been doing all this time, he said that he'd been with these men, and that he'd been forced to have sex, and if he didn't do what was asked, he was beaten up. What we found out after the fact is that my son had been missing for 6 weeks. He'd been kept in a drugged up stupor the entire time that he'd been missing, that he thought he'd only been missing for 2 weeks. He came home with burn marks, kind of like the end of a pop pipe, burn marks up and down his forearms that they branded him with. They gave him the offer he probably couldn't refuse. He was living on the streets down in Madison. He was working at a gentleman's club for cash. They approached him outside the club and said, you know, do you want a job? And I'll get you a job, I'll get you a place to live, some clothes, some food, a phone, anything that he wanted if he would come work for them. So during the time the police picked him up, we realized who these men really were. The police were able to investigate into it. We found out that there are known child sex predators in the Madison area. The police were aware of who they were. They just didn't know, they didn't have enough evidence or anything to arrest them. At the time that my son was picked up, he was staying in the juvenile detention center up in La Crosse. And so when we picked him up in Madison, he went to the juvenile detention center in Madison. But what happened during that time is while my son sat in Madison, those men who trafficked my son started visiting my son in jail. They also were trying to tell him how to get into a rehab center, because that's what Jeffrey wanted, was to get clean. And so they said, we'll help you get into a rehab center, and then you can get you a job when you get out. And they were making all these promises to them. One of the men that trafficked my son used to call me, and I used to think of him almost as my son's hero at that time, because I thought, he is my son's friend. He's the one and only person that wants to get my son a job, that wanted to get my son into rehab, that would let my son call home. So I thought he was a good guy. And that just tells you how they even brainwash the family. Even manipulate the family to believe that they're good people. And but really what he was doing is whenever my son would call home, he would call in a 3-way phone call. And so that my son would call the trafficker would call me, and then Jeffrey and I could talk to each other, but not knowing that there was a third person listening on all our conversations. And it really took several phone calls before he spoke up at one conversation, and I realized someone was on the phone with us. What really, really was alarming to me now, to look back on it, was that we were so focused on who those men were and what they had done to my son that I really hadn't thought about what my son had gone through. And so this was before any of us had any type of training on trauma-informed care. Nobody was talking about human trafficking back then. We just really didn't know anything about it. And so my son came home that night and was placed back in this jail, and he asked to go to this room they call the chill room. And it's a room with headphones and music and a beanbag chair, and you can sit and listen to music. And that night my son asked to go to that room and listen to some music, and it's always worked in the past, but this day he went to that room and took the cord and attempted suicide that evening. He was transferred to a hospital that night, and while he was in the hospital, the doctors there in the ER said he was fine, he could go back to jail. And the jail was like, no, this boy needs to be in mental health. He needs to be in a behavioral health hospital. And so we were able to get him into hospital, and as always, nothing works very quickly. And so unfortunately, he sat in the hospital for a week. And then one day he was fed up, and he climbed the fence and ran. down to the nearest Walgreens, asked a woman to borrow a phone and said, hey, can I call my mom? And instead of calling me that day, he called his traffickers. I cried a lot, and it was really painful for him to see what he was putting the family through. And so for him, he felt like the only people who cared for him were the traffickers. So my son sits in adult jail in Madison until June of 2016, when he's let out. I bring him home. We have him home for 9 days. It's wonderful. Life seems back to normal. It seems like, that kind of was that rock bottom moment, and things seem to be looking up. And then one day he just disappeared. The next thing I know, it's September 30th, 2016. I have the sheriff at my door telling me that my son had passed away from an accidental heroin overdose that was laced with fentanyl.
Okay, ready? Exploitation is the act of using someone unfairly for your own advantage. So I would say my story just starts as a young teenager, really just trying to figure out who I am, being born in New Orleans and moving here in high school. I didn't know how to fit in. I didn't know where my place was, and moving from a whole different city to a new city was a blueprint for somebody to need a friendship or integration into community. And so starting in that as a young person, just becoming impressionable and how do I fit in with the cool kids or with the cool crowd, and just really finding what does that look like. And through that experience, I found out the currency in society is really how popular you could be. And those are the things that I started to really value. I became a mom at a very young age. I was not planning on being a mom. I was not in any condition to become a mom. I was just a young girl that was having fun, and then I was going to be a mom. And so that really changed the trajectory of things. I would say the relationship with my son's dad was probably in the fast life. It just became really clear that I could basically use my body to get access to certain social scenes. And so what I come to find out as I enter into these different scenes is that you're not just showing up to a club to dance or to do something. So I set out to go and work at a club in Minneapolis. I was a banker in Eau Claire. I was making, okay money, but I was a single mom. So I had a lot of pressure on my shoulders. I'm 22 years old, right? So as any good business person would understand, I could go up here and make $2,000 a night, $3,000 a night. And what I'm making, in 3 weeks working a banking job. So I would go, once my eyes were open to actually what happens in a gentleman's club, it's a whole different ballgame. I had no idea. I thought I was just going to be a cocktail waitress. And what took place was you paid the house a lot of money to be there. And what I witnessed is women would leave the club. They had their customers and they would get paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to be somebody's sugar baby or to be somebody's something, right? But underneath all of that, they had to sustain that lifestyle. They had to use drugs or alcohol to manage. I think a lot of the women, the commonality that we had was childhood sexual abuse, which kind of grooms you for that lifestyle as well. That's kind of another inner working that is kind of behind the scenes that for me, it made sense because my whole life, there was always that dynamic of an abuser and a victim. What I witnessed and what I saw was the depravity of the soul, where in order to actually sustain the darkness, your soul, you have to quiet that soul pain. And so many of us developed addictions, or we would numb that with drugs or alcohol to be able to sustain the environment because it's just really toxic. So it looked like you're, highly medicated on Xanax or Adderall or Oxycontin, because that was the thing back then. So you just had a cocktail to keep you functioning. And then it looked like you would be able to go to the grocery store. You would be able to get the things done that you needed to do, but you were not living. You were like the Walking Dead. It gave you a sense of belonging to something, But there was also this underlining piece where it didn't look like what you would think exploitation looks like, with like a room full of children getting exploited. That's kind of where the mind went. So it didn't feel wrong until, you started to peel back the layers and you realize the whole system is set up against you and you actually are being exploited. That's what marketing is. It's grooming a person to desire what they're selling, or they're telling you that you have a need, and they're also giving you the solution. And I could just remember walking in to that club in Minneapolis and seeing the women and seeing they were sad. But through all the lights and all the makeup, you just put your smile on and you keep going. And at the end of the day, you had a drink and used drugs to numb the pain.
And a lot of people think my story would end right there, once he died. But when I did my son's funeral, we did a Friday night visitation and a Saturday funeral. And the social worker that worked with our family asked if she could bring some of the kids in that had worked with my son. And I said that was fine. And so when the social worker came through, her third time, fourth time, I kind of joked on her last time through that, finally you get to come for yourself. And she whispers in my ear, "He's on his way." And I said, "Who's on his way?" And she said, "The trafficker." But she said, "Don't worry about it. He will not come to the funeral. We will stop him at the interstate. He won't get in here." And probably not even 5 minutes after she walked out, he walked in. And it gets out to the cemetery, and we are at the point of the service where the service is over and it's time for the family to leave. And about that time, my daughter elbows me and she's like, "Mom, look over there." And I look over to my side, and there is a man, and I can remember exactly how he was dressed, but there was a man standing there, and he had about a 15-year-old boy with him. And he had his arm around this boy here, and his other arm was clasping his forearm. And my gut just told me he was telling this boy, "This is going to be you. If you don't do what we want you to do, you're going to be just like Jeffrey." And I lost it. I fell apart. I started crying. And then as I was crying, my daughter elbows me again, and she says, "Mom, look out there." And there's like a sea of hundreds of kids out there, so many of my son's friends out there. And in amongst all of them is this guy I kind of referred to as the hero earlier, this guy who I thought was my son's friend at the time. And he was standing out there in amongst all these people and just staring at me. And I swear he never blinked once. He just was staring at me, and I completely lost it. That was one of those ugly cry moments where you can't even speak. I couldn't be coherent whatsoever. And my family started gathering around me thinking that I was crying so hard because I didn't want to put my son in the ground. And the reality was I was crying so hard because I was never going to let these men have access to my son again. I was never going to let another family go through what our family had been through. Parents need to be educated on what human trafficking is, what their child's been through, and realize that child, and I say child because when they left the home, they're always going to be their child, whether they're 28 years old or 8 years old, they're still their child. And so that child that left the house so many years ago is not the same person who's coming home today. I believe so strongly in never give up. Never, ever give up on a person. Sometimes you might want to pull your hair out. Some days it's really rough. Some days you might need to go for a walk for a while. But never give up on that person. 9 times out of 10, that person just needs to be loved. They need someone to listen to them. And I think when you talk to a lot of survivors, that's some of the things they wish someone would have done. They wish someone would have listened to them. They wish someone would have heard what they needed. And I think that's important. When we start to get riled up, when we start to get angry and mad, it's important for us to take that step back and just really breathe, listen, and decide what's most important here right now.
Like you're not living. Like you don't get out of this thing without paying, and you pay for it with your soul. But there was just something within me that was drawing me close. And I just kept following that voice, which led me to really believe that I went to church, and then I started to hear the gospel, like not because somebody was preaching it, but I heard it in my spirit. Like I heard it in my heart. and I wanted whatever that was, I was going to follow that. I will say that my older son, you know, he was 7 years old when I got sober, so he lived through a lot of the neglect because I wasn't available for him. I didn't know how to be. I was still trying to parent myself while being a mom. So he luckily, you know, my mother helped a lot to take care of him, and I'm forever grateful for that grace in my life for him. I wouldn't even say that it's my grace. I think that was really for him. And I think God works in just beautiful ways in our mess. But I would say your presence is the most important, you know, to be there and really for you to heal whatever things that keep you maybe bound as a person, as a mom, because we're all humans, or dad. I think that it's just really important that you go through your own steps of redemption and recovery so that you can be the best for the generation to come and your kids. And so I think for parents, what they could, you know, for younger kids that are impressionable through social media, I think it's really just having the conversations with them and helping them understand that this type of world does exist. And this is things that you need to look for, and really just being open with them and ask, like, are there, like, what do you desire? Like, what are the things what are your hopes and dreams? Like, what do you hope for? What do you want to do? And then from there, I think you can really get an understanding of what their heart's saying. And then how do you position conversations to show what predators look like and kind of be able to just be transparent with them about that. The internet world is very deep and the whole, like the rabbit holes, I guess, lead to really dark places. And I think that it's a really good tool for a person that wants to exploit women specifically to use. They start to just find out what you like, what you're posting, and then they start to talk about things that you value. And pretty soon they build a trust and a relationship with you, and they feel safe. And then now starts coming the other stuff. And then pretty soon you're just doing the things that they're asking you to do. I can remember I was sitting on my dad's deck, and I had this glimpse of what my life would be like if I continued down the same path and desiring the things of what we would call the world, right? And letting that be the structure that filled my life. It was empty. And there was no escape. Like, there was no way out. And so he was offering me this other life, but I had to leave that life behind. And I think that was the most pivotal moment where I was like, wow, I don't know what that life is going to look like, but I was willing to go and do it his way. And that's really my hope for other women that may watch this, or other people, is that they can find their courage through a relationship and inner healing with God, and be able to walk away from those situations.
And I audibly heard, "It's not your time." I woke up a week later in a hospital, and there was no cops, there was nothing. They had written me off as dead and left that quickly. I just wanted out of there because I was so nervous that they were going to find out I was alive and come back. And so I had somebody drive down and pick me up, and the colors looked different. I remember walking outside, and everything just looked different. And I knew there was a God. I knew there was a God, but I didn't know how to change the behaviors. I didn't know how to change. It was so ingrained in me. I didn't know how else to operate, how to ask for help, I didn't know what to do. So I kept doing what I was doing, and I ended up getting revoked from my probation, and on the allegations of what had happened in Kansas, me getting caught with all that. And to this day, and this is so crazy, to this day, I have a warrant out of Kansas, but they don't want to come get me unless I'm within 2 states. They can't come and extradite me from here, or unless I'm within a 2-state radius. I mean, to me, that's God right there. That's God saying, hey, this is I know what you needed. You needed something drastic. You needed something that was really going to wake you up. But during that time, I was revoked for 14 months. So I went back to prison, and April 16th of 2020, I'm laying in my bed. 21. I'm laying in my bed on the top bunk watching Judge Judy. And out of nowhere, something hits my chest, and takes my breath away. And I kind of sit up. And once again, I audibly heard, "This is what the Holy Spirit is." And from that moment on, my life changed. When I tell you, instantly, my thought process, everything about me changed. The desire to talk, swear, the desire to listen to certain music and watch certain TV shows. I had this thirst and a hunger for him. And I wrote to the chaplain and asked her to tell me about God. And that was the beginning. And I got to know him, and he got to know me. I had such a beautiful relationship with Jesus. That is my lifeline. That's my lifeline to a happy and content life. And I know that. So I'm constantly searching that. I'm constantly grasping for that. And when I got involved with Fierce Freedom, when I went and I spoke with them and talked to them, and they listened, and they were believers, and it's put that fire back in me. But it's something that I'm constantly in check with. I have to constantly be in check with not just that, but my motives, because I was so used to manipulating and just using all these different tactics to survive. I'm constantly in check. I'm just constantly aware of my thoughts and my actions and how it's going to affect others. And without discomfort, there's no growth. And so one thing I'm really comfortable with now, and I like to be uncomfortable. I like to be pushed. Because that's when I know things are happening inside. So I'm different that way. I believe there's a lot that can be learned from somebody that's been through the things I've been through. There's people that want to listen, There's a lot of people, they say they want to get involved and they want to help as much as they can, but when push comes to shove, they step back because they get uncomfortable. People don't want to talk about the dirty, gross side of sex trafficking, when really, it's your neighbor. They might not have actually done, kidnapped a kid or sold him, but guaranteed one of your neighbors is exploiting in some way, whether it's through pornography, whether it's because it's all, and once your mind, especially sexually, once you've gone to to a certain depth, you got to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So it just keeps perverting, and it's really scary. It's really scary what we're in for, I believe.
What would you tell your 14, 15, 16-year-old self?
I would take what I know about and what I've learned about Jesus and his love and his, I would instill that into me. I would put that into me, and I don't know, just tell me that I am loved. Like, it doesn't matter. My worth doesn't come from anywhere else. And I know that now. It doesn't matter who I have in my life. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm the same. I mean the same to Jesus now as I did when I was on the street. That it doesn't matter how I'm acting. That I am worthy, and I am lovable. I am. Yeah, I am.